Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we continue the story of Toan and Tu Diem, where a quiet morning separation turns into a test of love, patience, and responsibility. While they work apart, each choice they make asks one question: can love grow even when two people are not side by side? If you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episodes. The winter morning began very early. Before the sky fully revealed shapes and faces, thick fog had already settled over the small garden in front of the house. The mist was heavy enough that even standing a few steps away, things looked blurred. The cold air cut deep, seeping into the skin, slipping through leaves, clinging to hair, fingers, and clothes. Even so, the first rays of sunlight still pushed through the fog. The light was thin and weak, but it was enough to signal that a new day had begun. The warmth was barely there, almost just a reminder that the sun had not disappeared. Toan stood in the uneven yard. The ground had not been leveled for a long time. Some spots were high, others low, and every few steps required care. In his hand was an old shovel, its wooden handle polished smooth from years of use. He did not rush. He simply stood there, looking toward Tu Diem. Tu Diem was preparing the harvest basket. She adjusted the strap, checked the rim to make sure it was secure. Her movements were slow and careful, not because she lacked experience, but because her body had not fully recovered. She was used to cold mornings like this, yet today the chill still made her shoulders tense slightly. Toan spoke first. His voice was quiet but clear. He reminded Tu Diem to wear another layer. Early mornings were cold, especially out in the fields where the wind was stronger. He told her to keep her neck warm, to walk carefully, not to rush. Then he added a familiar line. He wished her a peaceful day. Enough strength to work, no pushing beyond her limits. His tone sounded ordinary, like many mornings before. But anyone standing close would notice something different in his eyes. Not loud worry, not panic, but a steady concern that had been there for some time. Health, medicine. The tired days that had not fully passed. He did not say any of it out loud. His gaze carried it instead. Tu Diem smiled, a gentle, familiar smile. She looked at Toan and spoke softly. Today, let me go alone. You stay home and finish the yard. That work needs someone watching over it. You should rest more. Your body is not fully back yet. Her words were unhurried, not a command. Just a suggestion, filled with care. Toan stayed silent for a few seconds. In that brief moment, the struggle inside him was clear. He wanted to go with her. He wanted to walk the field together, dig sweet potatoes together, laugh when they uncovered big, straight, beautiful ones. At the same time, he looked down at the yard. The work was unfinished. If it was not done today, it would drag on again. And more importantly, his body needed rest if he wanted to stay by her side longer, not just today. In the end, Toan nodded. He did not say much. He repeated the usual reminders. Take your medicine on time. Do not bend too much. If you feel tired, stop and rest. Tu Diem listened and nodded gently. Then she turned and began to walk away. She headed toward the gate. Her figure grew smaller in the thick fog. Each step seemed to disappear into the mist. Toan remained where he was. He did not call after her. He simply watched. His hand tightened around the shovel handle. The cold from the metal traveled upward. In his chest was a feeling hard to name. Part hope, part a faint ache, barely noticeable but real. The new day began with a very small separation. No one called it distance, but both felt it. That moment made their bond clear. No big words, no promises, just care repeated day after day. The light grew stronger, the cold remained. Breath still showed faintly in the air. Toan watched Tu Diem lift the basket onto her shoulder and step through the gate. He added a few more reminders, almost by instinct. Be careful on the road. Do not overwork. Come back early. Tu Diem turned around. Her eyes glimmered, partly from the fog, partly from emotion. She asked him instead, "Have you taken your medicine yet? Remember to take it on time. Do not forget." Toan nodded. His voice was low and warm, with a slight tremble he did not hide. He said he would try to finish the yard today. Tomorrow, if he felt better, they would go together. The words sounded light, but inside him was clear regret. He wanted to be there. He wanted to share every small task. But he knew that if he did not protect his strength today, the days ahead would be harder. Tu Diem smiled, reassuring him. She said she was leaving now. Do not worry too much. Then she stepped outside. Her figure vanished behind the fence. The yard felt empty again. Toan stood alone, the shovel still in his hand, his eyes resting on the open space for a long moment. A cold wind swept across the yard. It brought a brief sense of loneliness. At the same time, it stirred a firm resolve inside him. He needed to finish today. Finish it properly. So tomorrow, there would be no need to send each other off like this. There was no dramatic farewell, no tears, just quiet reminders. Yet within them lived worry, sacrifice, and trust that today's effort was meant for a closer tomorrow. The sound of a truck broke the morning silence at the gate. Dust rose under the strengthening sunlight. Several workers stepped down, shovels and hoes resting on their shoulders. They greeted Toan with friendly voices. The workday began. They said Mr. Thu had sent them to level the yard, dig drainage ditches, prepare for concrete work later on. Toan pointed and explained carefully. His voice was steady and slow, though fatigue was already there. From here to there needed to be flattened. Leave an embankment about 40 centimeters high to block rainwater. The workers nodded and got started right away. The sound of shovels cutting into soil, hoes striking the ground, filled the space. The rhythm was steady, familiar, like the heartbeat of work. Toan did not stand aside. He rolled up his sleeves. He dug with them. He shoveled soil. He pushed wheelbarrows to the corner of the yard. Sweat soon soaked his shirt, even though the air remained cold. Each shovel swing demanded more from his body. The tiredness was real, but in his mind was a clear image of the yard finished, clean and even. A place where they would cook together, sit down to meals together. Time moved quickly. Toan reminded himself to finish before dark, before Tu Diem came home. Laughter and simple conversation from the workers mixed with the sound of falling soil. The work atmosphere was plain, but full of life. Toan paused once. He wiped sweat from his forehead and looked toward the distant fields. That was where Tu Diem was working alone. Inside him, there was only one thought. Keep going. Finish it. So when she returns, she will see how much has changed. The afternoon moved forward quietly. The sun leaned toward the west, and its light shifted into a warm orange gold. Long shadows stretched across the newly leveled yard, tracing the shape of the work that had been done. The soil was still damp, darker in color, smoother and more even than it had been in the morning. Toan stood in the middle of the yard. Dust clung to his clothes. Sweat covered his back and arms. His shirt stuck to his skin. Every movement reminded him of the long hours since morning. His legs felt heavy. His shoulders were tight. But when he heard the gate open, his posture changed. Tu Diem stepped inside. The harvest basket rested on her shoulder, clearly heavy. She slowed her steps and stopped just inside the gate. For a moment, she did not speak. Her eyes moved across the yard, taking everything in. The ground was flat. The uneven spots were gone. The drainage ditch ran clean and straight along the edge. The gate posts stood upright, their bases firmly set in fresh concrete. Everything looked orderly, solid, and ready for the next step. Toan spoke first. His voice carried fatigue, but also a quiet pride. He explained without exaggeration. The workers arrived early. They leveled the yard, dug the drainage, welded the gate frame. Tomorrow they would pour the kitchen floor. Tu Diem lowered the basket and placed it gently on the ground. She looked at Toan more closely now. She could see it clearly. He had not only supervised, he had worked alongside them. He had stood under the cold sun all day, pushing his body even when it was not fully recovered. Her eyes softened. For a brief moment, she said nothing. Toan looked back at her. His tone slowed. He told her she must have worked hard too. The sweet potatoes looked good, big and clean. They stood there together, facing the yard. No one rushed to speak. No one needed to fill the silence. Just being in the same space eased the weight that had built up since morning. The workers finished packing their tools. They thanked Toan and said they would return early the next day. Toan handed them water one by one and thanked them in return. When the truck drove away, the sound faded quickly down the road. The yard became quiet again. Toan let out a small breath. He said it was a shame they could not invite the workers to stay for dinner. It was already late, and the day had run longer than expected. Tu Diem smiled gently. She said tomorrow they would continue. Tomorrow they would prepare better. They walked to the porch and sat down on the steps. Each of them held a cup of boiled water prepared in the morning, still warm enough to bring comfort. In front of them, the smooth yard reflected faint moonlight. Above, the moon hung thin and pale. They did not talk much. There was no need. The sounds of insects filled the space. Their breathing slowed, steady and calm. After a while, Toan reached out and took Tu Diem's hand. His voice was low and quiet. Today was hard, he said, but it was worth it. Tu Diem tightened her grip slightly. Inside her, the feeling was clear. There was regret for a day not fully shared, for hours spent apart. But there was also strong reassurance. Even separated, they had been building the same life from different places. They stood up together. Tu Diem stepped into the kitchen first. Toan followed. They lit the stove and began preparing a simple meal. Familiar movements, familiar sounds. Outside, the winter night pressed cold against the walls. The air grew sharper, but inside the small house, warmth slowly spread. From the fire, from the closeness, from standing side by side without needing many words. The day came to an end. It was not perfect. It was tiring. It demanded patience and restraint. But it was meaningful. A day shaped by work, care, and quiet commitment. Tomorrow they would continue. Together.